Hey, y'all. It's me, Jeff Nowak, WWL digital sports producer. We're going live on YouTube here just to let you know what's happening. Uh, Steve Geller and myself recorded the first two segments of our podcast this morning, and he's going out of town, so we just want to get that out of the way. And now I'm coming back and recording the final segment by myself, solo. After kind of going to practice, we have a good idea who the practice squad is now. I'll go through that. It's going to be the majority of what we do this segment. And if anyone has any questions they want to throw in there, we'll get to them. The first two segments were a lot about CJ Gardner-Johnson and, the 53-man roster. So if there are questions about specific players that aren't CJ, that would probably be ideal. Otherwise, I'll just get into whatever questions anyone has. I'm going to keep vamping here for a minute. The other thing to note is, I have a few exclusive interviews on my recorder. I'm going to tease a one-on-one with Lewis Kidd that I got today in the locker room. I'm not going to play that here, for one, because I don't have it edited yet. And for two, because I want to be able to tout it on the podcast as exclusive. So I'm just going to kind of set it up, and then we're going to move on. And if you want to listen to that, go check out the podcast when it posts tomorrow. Because after I get done here, I'm going to chop up all the audio on my recorder and get that kind of set up so we can parcel it out to you in the next episode or so. We got an interview with Bradley Roby. I thought he had some really interesting things to say. I got an exclusive interview with Landon Young, who I think gave a pretty good insight into what Trevor Penning's dealing with. And then I had a one-on-one with Carl Granderson. So, we're going to sprinkle some of that info in over the next episode or so. But tomorrow's going to be Lewis Kidd, because he made the 53 is the only UDFA on it. And we're going to go from there. But okay, so we got a couple people in here now. Again, if you want to throw your questions, comments in the chat, I'm going to go through the practice squad first, and then I'm kind of going to get to some, viewer questions if there are any. And this is the final segment of the episode of Inside Black and Gold. It's going to go up tomorrow. So without further ado, let's get into it. And welcome back. My name is Jeff Nowak. You're listening to Inside Black and Gold. Make sure, if you like what you're hearing, hit that subscribe button. Give us 5 stars if you don't mind. Give us a review if you have any input you'd like to share. And we're going to get right into, I'm going to get right into it here. I had to cut Steve loose. Steve is going out of town. We recorded the first 2 segments in the morning, and then I had to run out to the facility, the Saints facility, got a few good interviews in the locker room. And now I'm back recording the final segment, which it's a good thing that I went out to the facility because they have not yet announced the practice squad. So is it coming through loud? Is that what you're saying? I just want to, if the sound's coming in weird, I just want to make sure. Elite Goods. I need you to elaborate. Is the sound coming through weird or no? All right, I'm going to assume it's fine. If you're having trouble with the audio, let me know and I'll try to fix it. But yeah, and it was a good thing I went out there because they have not yet announced the practice squad as I record this. It is 5 p.m. on Wednesday. But one of the ways you can find out who the practice squad is by going to practice, which we did, and kind of IDing who didn't make the roster but was still out there. So here are the 14 names that I saw at practice who had been cut, which indicates that they are on the practice squad. And thank you for letting me know. Good. He said supreme high vibration. So I was just making sure that wasn't like me blowing out the microphone. So good to hear. So the 14 names that I saw out there who got cut yesterday and were participating in practice today. Defensive back Vincent Gray. That's not a surprise to me. I thought that what he showed in that final preseason game where he played cornerback and safety, you have Dennard Allen loves talking about positional versatility. And anytime you see a guy doing that, you can bet, dollars to donuts, they're going to try to keep him around. And that's what's going on with Vincent Gray. Also, cornerback DeMarcus Fields, linebacker Chase Hansen, linebacker Nephi Sewell, linebacker Eric Wilson, defensive tackle Josh Black, defensive tackle Jordan Jackson, offensive lineman Josh Andrews, center Nick Martin, wide receiver Dejon Dixon, wide receiver Kirk Merritt, wide receiver Rashid Shaheed, and tight end JP Holtz. I had someone tell me they saw John Bostic out there as well. I didn't see him. I didn't identify him by his number, so I'm not going to report that he's on the practice squad, but that's the other name that I was aware of that I wasn't able to confirm. So keep that in mind. So that's 15. You have a 16-man practice squad. That's 15 players. And I think what probably happened there is the 16th player was supposed to be Ian Book, and he was signed or he was claimed on waivers by the Eagles. So I think that's probably why you only have 15. The guy who wasn't out there, who I was surprised by, was Abram Smith, number 33, was not on the field. He's not on the practice squad as far as I can tell, but maybe he will be now that you have that extra spot open. But that's going to be something we need to watch for. The Saints had not announced the practice squad as of 5 p.m. By the time this posts, you'll probably have the full list. But that's what I am aware of right now, and we're going to kind of go off that. But I think that is a pretty solid list. It's pretty close to the list that I had put out in my projection, with the exception of obviously Chase Hansen, Nephi Sewell. I had on my final roster. I'm kind of bummed that they didn't make the final roster, but you do keep them around on the practice squad. You're able to elevate them a few times throughout the season and maybe sign them if you end up needing them down the road to the active roster. So that's a good thing. And I think that's a pretty solid practice squad. The only question I have is whether you need to go out and find a quarterback, which I think you probably do. Whether it's KJ Costello, who is a little familiar with the system, you had him in. One way or another, I think you need someone who can go out there and run scout team quarterback, right? And I think that the Saints are probably a little bummed because they wanted to, keep Ian Book on the practice squad, right? He's a guy who knows the offense. He's a guy who can move around. He's athletic. He can simulate some of these mobile quarterbacks you're going to end up facing. And the Eagles, I don't know what they saw in Ian Book. I think that he's an interesting player, an intriguing player, but I was very surprised to see him claimed on waivers just from what we saw in the preseason. But hey, they now get to keep Ian Book on the roster, and he's going to be backing up Jalen Hurts to some degree. So hey, good for him. Good for Ian, right? He gets a shot on another roster, and he gets a guaranteed spot on their 53, because when you claim someone off waivers, you get a guaranteed spot on the 53. A reminder, if in the back half of this, we're going to get into some viewer questions. So if you have any, make sure to throw them in there, and we'll get to those at the end. But we spent some time in the locker room today, and hold on, there's a dog entering the building, so I'm gonna hold off here. He's a good boy. So, full disclosure, my office is unavailable right now, so I'm in the living room recording this because I'm not dedicated. But so one player who did make the 53 roster, the only UDFA to make the 53-man roster this year, is Lewis Kidd, who I was able to chat with in the locker room today, and take a listen. Okay. Like I said, I don't have that audio cut yet. That's really just the spot so I can plug it in. So if you want to hear that, go check out the podcast when it posts tomorrow morning, and that'll be in there. Literally just got home, so I'm just trying to knock this out as quickly as possible. So, Lewis Kidd is interesting. I don't know if he would have made the roster if not for Trevor Penning's injury, but, good for him. It's an opportunity for him to step forward. The Saints did claim, I always forget, Owen Tanner. He's tough to remember because he has two first names, and I can never remember the order. I always try to call him Tanner Owen. I think it might be Tanner Owen. Let me double check that before I... It is Tanner Owen. I got it backwards. I keep getting it backwards. The Saints did claim Tanner Owen off the Bills cut list, and so they're going to have to keep him on the roster. And so I do wonder what that means for Lewis Kidd. They might revert him to the practice squad, but either way, it's a cool story. Small school kid able to get a chance to make that roster. That doesn't happen for a lot of people. It's rare to see guys make the practice or make the 53-man roster as a UDFA. And I think it says a lot about, what the work he put in his rookie season. So good on him. And, you just kind of keep going and see what happens there. Here's a good question. Well, that's not really a question, but someone else. So what's so special about Traequan Smith? Now, one thing to keep in mind here, there are a few players who I think made the roster because you plan to put them on IR, right? Malcolm Roach reverted to IR today. I think Trevor Penning reverts to IR. And I wouldn't be surprised if Traequan Smith, who's dealing with a shoulder injury, reverts to IR. And that probably saved his spot on the roster. He might have had one either way. But what's so special about Traequan Smith? Well, he's a guy who does what the dirty work. He does the things that not everyone excels at. Every wide receiver wants to go out there and catch passes, and not everyone dreams about going out there and just blocking on a on a crack toss play, but that's what he does, and he does it well, and that's gonna find you a spot on the roster. Another guy, Nick Vannett, who restructured his deal, much like Latavius Murray last year. I don't know if he declines that, he probably doesn't make the roster. So these are the things that, there's a thin line here and you kind of go for it. But that's, Traequan, it's easy to do that and you kind of go from there. But we didn't cut Dwayne Washington unless something happened that I'm not aware of. But as far as I know, Dwayne Washington made the roster. So let me double check here. Oh, they did. Great. They just released Dwayne Washington earlier today. So that was while I was driving home. Yeah. Well, he is dealing with an injury, so I wouldn't be surprised if they do bring him back on the practice squad. The other guy who's dealing with an injury is Paulson Adebo. We found out today that's an ankle injury. And so he's expecting to be ready week 1. I talked to Landon Young and Carl Granderson. They both say they're healthy and ready to go week 1. So that's good. Adam Troutman, another guy who was dealing with an injury, sounds like he's good to go. So yeah, let's just get into it. Why did they release Dwayne Washington? Well, I expect it's because he's dealing with an injury. And rather than revert him to IR, they decided to release him so they can probably, because they had to make a roster move somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a guy who gets brought back. He's a valuable special teams guy. But I also think it probably tells you that they're confident in Tony Jones Jr. He's a guy who made the roster for the second consecutive year. And he's going to have a role on special teams. But I am surprised to see that Dwayne Washington is no longer on the roster. He's been there for so long. He feels like he just has a baked-in role. But it'll be interesting to watch over the next 24 hours. They did have to make a corresponding move with Tanner Owen, although they put Malcolm Roach on IR. So there's going to be some spots opening up. I think this might be a situation where there's a veteran player, much like you saw Aldrick Roses last year, Alex Arma last year. They got released, and that with the intention of bringing them back because the Saints felt confident that they could bring them back. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's what's happening with Dwayne Washington here. But it does mean, he can go sign somewhere else if he wants to. So that is interesting. And yeah, that literally happened as I was walking out of the door of the facility and in the car on the way home. So that's why I wasn't aware of it. But no, that is surprising to me for sure. But yeah, I mean, it means that you have. It means that you have a running back room of Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram, and Tony Jones Jr., which that sure sounds like a room that's going to get another name in it somewhere, whether that's Dwayne Washington or somebody else. I would expect him to come back. Someone says Washington is not that good. I mean, he's a special teams contributor. I'm not surprised that he might not be in the RB3 race. I thought that going in, where Tony Jones Jr. made more sense. But he's a good special teamer. He's a valuable guy to have around, and I would be surprised if they just released him with no intention of bringing him back. But we'll end up seeing in the next couple days. It's a rough day for players that have been around for the last few years because CJ is no longer there. But we did talk to Dennard Allen today. One thing that he said that was interesting is they're not going to necessarily just say, okay, this is the slot corner, right? The way CJ was the slot corner, we knew what he was going to play. It sounds like their plan is going to be, okay, let's look at the team we're facing. What do they like to do out of the slot? Do they have a really athletic tight end like Kyle Pitts? Maybe that's a guy who you need a more physical corner. So maybe you'll go with a PJ Williams or Justin Evans or an Alontae Taylor. Is this more of a cover situation where they run a lot of fast receivers out of the slot? Because I think that would suit Bradley Roby a little better. And I think that's what you're going to have, where Dennard Allen really likes to be adjustable. And I think this allows him to do that. So if you are looking for the most minuscule silver lining in CJ Gardner-Johnson's departure, it's probably that you can be a little more unpredictable with how you adjust your game plan on the defensive side of the ball as it pertains to the nickel corner, more than you could in the past because you knew that was CJ's bag and he was going to be doing it. So I think it's a weak silver lining, but you could argue it. And that's kind of what he said today. And that's kind of what I expected him to say, because that's something that he values very much, is positional versatility and not having to be pigeonholed into, okay, we're doing this every week. It's one of the reasons you brought in Marcus May and Tyrann Mathieu, because you feel comfortable with one playing strong, one playing free, and then flipping it whenever you need to. So I think you're going to see a similar situation with some of the depth safeties and the nickel corner. Marlon Mack is still out there. Yeah, that's an interesting option if they decide to go there. They'd have to sign him off the Texans practice squad, because he did get signed to the Texans practice squad. But he's an option. But I think it's a tough sell to me to look at a guy who just got released by the Texans, who aren't exactly a powerhouse in the run game. You know, Dameon Pierce looked good, not great. That doesn't inspire a ton of confidence to me that he's ready to go. The guy who I might take a long look at is Trey Sermon, who got released by the 49ers. He's a second-year player, and I think his issue was, more so that he was stuck behind Elijah Mitchell, and they just drafted another running back in the mid-rounds. I think Ty Davis-Price at LSU. So, I think he might be a guy who you take a flyer on if you really feel that he might not have gotten a fair shake out in San Fran. But I would be surprised if it's Marlon Mack. And I think from what we know about the Saints and how they operate in terms of these last few roster spots, I would be surprised if you don't see Dwayne Washington back in the building in the next couple days. But that's just my take on it. All right, let's see if there's any other questions. Now, so one other thing that I'll mention, that when we talked to Bradley Roby, he didn't exactly light up when we brought up the concept of him playing in the slot. I think it's something that he'll do if he's asked to, but he didn't strike me as a guy who's thrilled about the prospect of playing in the slot. So that'll be interesting to watch. I don't know if it's definitely going to be Bradley Roby in the slot. I really don't. I think PJ Williams might profile as the better option there, especially when you're talking about like Atlanta, for instance, week 1, where you're going to have to figure out how to cover Kyle Pitts. He's a big dude. You got to be physical with that guy. And I just don't think that's, I think Bradley Roby is a really good cornerback. I think he's a good cover corner. He's just not physical at the point of attack, right? I don't think that's the primary strength of his game. Whereas being a ball hawk is a really strong element in his game. And I want to see him in coverage with the ability to kind of, crash down and play kind of robber sets where he can go and make those interceptions. Because I think getting your hands on the ball and being able to catch it as a defensive back is a skill that not everyone has. And I think you want to take advantage of that. And it's a whole harder to take advantage of that in the slot. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's PJ week 1, but that'll be something to watch. And I think that's also something that if PJ is out there week 1, that's not necessarily going to be the plan every week. Let's see. All right. I'm not seeing a ton of other questions, so I'll probably wrap it up here. Again, this is the final segment of the episode of Inside Black and Gold. It's going to post tomorrow. Steve Geller and myself recorded the first 2 this morning, but he had to go out of town. So it's kind of a weird, disjointed episode. So if you want to listen to the whole thing, which we get into a lot about CJ Gardner-Johnson, I know that it's weird that I'm coming on here not talking about CJ that much, but we did get into it a lot this morning. So I wanted to get into some other topics. But so you're going to check that out tomorrow. There's an exclusive interview with Lewis Kidd, the offensive lineman who made the 53-man roster, the UDFA. And, he's an intriguing guy. He's a big dude. And I think that, something about him really stood out to the Saints to keep him on that 53-man roster. So, good for him. But that's going to wrap it up on this episode of Inside Black and Gold. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Hit me up on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can hit Steve up on Twitter at Steve Geller, WWL. Make sure to check out WWL.com for the latest news, notes, and analysis. I have the list of practice squad entries there, and we'll see how it goes. All right, y'all. Peace. Thanks, guys. I know this was kind of random, and I didn't advertise it at all. So just wanted to get this out there because it's been a crazy couple of days with the cutdowns. Cutdown week is always brutal when you're kind of getting into training camp schedule. One of the things that changed the last couple of days is we no longer get to watch the full practice. So we just go out there, we get in there for 20 minutes, basically enough time to take attendance. And that's about it. And then we kind of wait around for an hour, then go talk to Dennard Allen. Then we get about 40 minutes in the locker room to kind of work our way around and talk to some players. And so that's kind of the routine we're getting into now. And it's different than it has been the last couple of years because COVID made it so we weren't allowed to go in the locker room. So this is the first time we're really getting back into that regular season flow where, I can just go in there and like Carl Granderson's hanging out in the corner. I can just go ask him some questions. And that's what happened today. And it's cool. I'm appreciating it because it's something that I didn't realize I would miss when the pandemic hit. And we're back doing it, so that's cool. So you get a lot. It's something that I think most people don't realize if you're not in the coverage kind of sphere is you're not getting very good content. You're not getting very good answers. You're not able to ask good questions. You're not able to talk to someone kind of just in a genuine way when you're standing up there at a press conference. You don't have the opportunity to follow up. So I think it's going to be great for especially this podcast because I'll be able to get a lot of interviews that are exclusive to me because I'm constantly just going around and just talking to people that I'll be able to throw into this podcast, and y'all are able to kind of appreciate just a kind of impromptu conversation in the locker room. Like I said, I'm going to be parsing out, probably the next episode we'll play the Landon Young interview because I thought he was really good. He's a really interesting guy to talk to. He's very smart. I've been told he's similar to how Zach Strief was as a young player, and I believe it. So we'll probably get into that. And again, that Carl Granderson interview and the content from Bradley Roby, talked to him about being a ball hawk, and he had some really good answers there. So make sure to check all that out. Make sure to go, if you're listening on here and you really like it, I understand that maybe this is where you get your podcast, but if you could still go and subscribe and give us a review, that's always helpful because we're still kind of working our way into the listings. Right. And that's the tough part is you start a podcast and people search New Orleans Saints and you're not on there. So it takes some time and it takes people finding it organically. And that's the tough part. So I appreciate everyone. I appreciate everyone who listens, everyone who hangs out. I hope I get good information to y'all. I hope you appreciate it. Yeah, thanks y'all. Have a good one.